Hello, everyone. I'm Everton de Oliveira, the Professor Agua from the Groundwater Project. And I'm very pleased to bring to you another great book. It's a fun reading. I love it. It's called The History and Hydraulics of Flowing Wells. I do recommend you to read this book. You're going to learn hydrogeology and the history of hydraulics. It's very nice. It's very nice. And I'm pleased to bring to you the authors. Dr. Xiao-wei Jiang. He serves as a professor of hydrogeology at China University of Geosciences in Beijing, and as one of the co-chairs of the Regional Groundwater Flow Commission International Association of Hydrogeologists. Welcome, Xiao-wei. And
hello,
Dr. John Cherry. He co-authored the Groundwater book, our Bible, with Alan Fries, and co-edited and co-authored several chapters in the book Dense Chlorinated Solvents in Groundwater, and idealized and put to run the Groundwater Project. Very good. Thank you both for this very nice book. I was really pleased to read it. So please, briefly introduce yourselves again and tell us how you came up with the idea and how you joined, both of you, to get it done.
Maybe I'll go first.
Great, welcome.
I met Xiao-wei in Beijing several years ago when I was visiting, and got to realize that he had a deep passion for the history of hydrogeology, and in particular for the theory of groundwater flow systems. And he'd followed the Canadian school, Joe Toth and Peter Myboom, and knew more about how ideas evolved in the Canadian history of hydrogeology, I think, than any Canadian. And then I realized that he was deeply interested in the history of ideas in hydrogeology, and I've never met anyone who digs so deep. And I think that led to the start of this story, and I'll let Xiao-wei take it from there.
Xiao-wei, please. Xiao-wei, you know.
Okay, yeah. So now I want to share my story with flowing wells. During the years 2011 and 2013, I saw many flowing wells near the lakes or near the rivers in the Ordos Basin, northwestern China. That was a pleasant memory of field trips. Although there is no casing in these flowing wells, the hydrochemical components of these wells are quite different from those of shallow wells. Therefore, I began to do research on hydraulics of flowing wells. In the year 2018, I came across some papers on Darcy and Dupuit, and was astonished to know that their work in the 1850s was also spared by flowing wells. I also learned that the birth of many important theories was more or less related to flowing wells. So in the year 2000 and in the winter of 2019, Jiang visited Beijing. And at that time, I just developed the idea to write a review paper on how flowing wells inspired the development of many concepts and theories of hydrogeology. So, and during John's visit to my university, he was very interested in my idea and invited me to write a groundwater project book. So several months later, during the course of the COVID-19, I had enough time to collect a lot of references on flowing wells and finished a review paper on the role of flowing wells in evolution of groundwater hydrology. After that, I began to write the book. Okay, maybe that's the story.
Oh, that's very good. That's very good. So your book has the wonderful ability to organize the information that most hydrogeologists use in their professional lives. Why flowing wells were or are so important to hydrogeology, and why they served as a path to the development of this science, please?
I could mention, so to further Xiao-wei's story, the curiosity he had was quite amazing. I mean, we all read about, Darcy and Dupuy, the standard story, and I guess what's so inspiring to me, he dug deeper and related it to flowing wells, which we hardly ever see now, and he connected it to flow systems, and even went before Darcy and Dupuy. And found now on the internet you can actually find these old documents, and in the old days you'd have to troop around the world to libraries. So this couldn't have been done 20 years ago. So one could say, well, why dig deeply into history? And I think what's important about this book is it shows how circumstance, Darcy and Dupuy in France and flowing wells, set up a science that where the thinking got so strongly influenced by those early events that it eventually began to be a burden and to cause the thinking to be off track.
It was 2 or 3 years ago. Groundwater is invisible, and how to make groundwater visible. The World Water Day 3 years ago, I think. Because groundwater is usually invisible, so people usually know little about groundwater. Deep wells provide clean drinking water free from contamination. In the early stage of groundwater development, groundwater in many deep wells can overflow. In this way, groundwater is visible in flowing wells. So many hydraulic engineers and geologists like Darcy, Dupuy in France, and Chamberlain in the United States began to explore the causes of flowing wells and also the hydraulics of flowing wells. So that's why flowing wells were so important to hydrogeology.
Yeah, no, that's true. Flowing wells was when groundwater was visible, and that kicked off the whole groundwater flow system theory thing back in the confined aquifer era. And now there are hardly any flowing wells. Many hydrogeologists have never seen one, for example. Yeah, and then having the flowing wells, Darcy and Dupuy were brilliant, and they got it all right. And then as groundwater science developed, the idea that the flowing wells had to be generated by an outcropping, totally confined aquifer, it got solidified in the mindset. And that's why then there was a revolution when King Hubbard published his theory of groundwater flow, but people ignored that. It was too mathematical. And then Canadians picked it up, Joe Totes and Peter Myboom, and sorted all of this out in what we now know as, gravity-driven groundwater flow systems. And that had been a passion of Xiao-wei's in China to take the Canadian ideas and apply them, and then to kind of understand how the ideas got going.
It's true. You talk about passion. We can see his passion reading the book, which is very good. So, by the way, I didn't know that flowing wells were behind Darcy's equation, for example. So please tell us how. That's interesting. And also, as John mentioned, tell us a little bit about the Darcy and Dupuy works. How were they related? It's a very nice story that you put there.
I'll let Xiao-wei comment on that, and then I'll come back to it. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. In the early 19th century, flowing wells were widespread in France. People cared about how much groundwater can be produced from a flowing well. In many flowing wells, as I wrote in my book and I cited a plot, the flow rates at different orifices of the well were measured. These measurements directly inspired Darcy to find out where the head loss occurred. And he believed that the head loss occurs in the aquifer, not in the well pipe. So that's the story that inspired Darcy's law.
Very interesting.
Very interesting.
And
yes.
yeah, and as it turned out, fluid mechanics as a science had developed in the 100 years prior, and the French were instrumental in that. And then Darcy and Dupuy were at the mining university, l'École des Mines, in Paris, and that was a very elite engineering school. I think Darcy was ahead of Dupuy by a year. And then they had professors interested in fluid mechanics. So all of the stars aligned for that instrument, for the two of them, Darcy and Dupuy together. It was critical. And I had thought all this groundwater stuff had come out of the fact that people were dying because of pollution in rivers, and therefore groundwater had a great interest. And that was true in Europe, and people were putting in wells along rivers. But that's not what kicked off, scientific hydrogeology.
That's true. That's true. That's I really enjoy the reading that. It's a great information. I didn't know because we study Darcy and Dupuy. We see the theory, but we see it as separate things. We don't know how that happened. And it's quite interesting. You had a good way of putting it, like the star aligning for that. That was very good. Yeah.
Oh, and further, many things in science come from collaborations. From Joe Toth and Peter Myboom collaborated, and then they debated intellectually. And so you have those two colleagues there collaborating and then publishing their things very close together in science. And then the whole intellectual pendulum swung to the United States because the settlers were going west and flooring wells were there. And so it happened in France when, there were fountains and spectacular exhibits flowing wells, and then the need to know more about groundwater shifted from France and Europe to the US, where the great thinkers of the time took over. And I'll let Xiao-wei comment a little bit more on that.
So I have another thing. I'm on several interesting information and that I think are very compelling on the reading of the book. You mentioned paradigm shifts, which is for science is quite difficult to happen. And one point that you mentioned, was that regional flow such a shift, a paradigm shift? Why? And again, why flowing wells were important, an important part of it?
Joe Todd also saw many flowing wells in his study area in Alberta, Canada. He believed that the area of flowing wells represents area of groundwater discharge. He proposed the term of unconfined flow flowing well, which is equivalent to topographically controlled flowing well. Therefore, the observations of flowing wells has contribution to his understanding of groundwater flow system. His mathematical model of regional groundwater flow, which well characterizes the recharge and the discharge numbers of a groundwater flow system, is considered as a paradigm shift in regional hydrogeology, because in the past, people had to neglect the vertical component of groundwater flow and assume that groundwater flow in unconfined aquifers is horizontal.
And I can add to that. So the big discovery prior to that was M. King Hubbard's famous paper, Theory of Groundwater Flow, in 1940, but it was very mathematical. Hubbard was a physicist originally, so the hydrogeological community didn't really pick up on it. And then Bob Frevolden, the mentor of the groundwater program at the University of Waterloo, and my mentor, and indirectly Everton's mentor, was charged with setting up a research group in Alberta. And Bob traveled to the US and somehow discovered M. King Hubbard's paper. And he hired Joe Toth and Peter Myboom and many other people who went on to become famous hydrogeologists in Canada. So it all kind of runs through Hubbard and Faribault and Alberta, and then these amazing immigrants who came to Canada. Peter Myboom at the same time as Joe Toth, and Peter went out to the field and connected flow systems to vegetation, and Peter put piezometers in aquatards and found flow systems in aquatards. So it's an amazing intellectual journey that Xiao-wei from China, being kind of not brainwashed in all this stuff, started off in his own right and discovered things and said wow and dug deeper and then brought us this wonderful story.
You're right. So it does feel like a fresh view, doesn't it? It's very good. Congratulations, Xiao-wei. It's very good. I like it.
Thank you.
So you picked 6 countries as examples, say France, Great Britain, United States, Australia, Canada, and of course, China, to show science application and improvement. Would there be others? And why, of course, why you picked those 6?
Okay. Actually, I mentioned 7 countries. In chapter 3, I also introduced the understanding of flowing wells in Italy in the 18th century.
That's true. That's true. Sorry about that. Yeah, that's true. I missed that. Yeah.
Okay. I think for these 7 countries, I think one reason is that I can get access to English references from these 6 countries, and of course Chinese references in China. Because the flowing wells in Italy and France were very famous, so there are many English literatures. And more important reason is that flowing wells in these 7 countries more or less contributed to development of groundwater hydrology.
It's true. Also, what's interesting about this is the coming of China now to international hydrogeology, and the advantage that the Chinese have is that they can read English and write English. We can't read their language, so they're coming from a whole other perspective in that great, large, varied country, and bringing their perspectives and past to the English language literature. So it's an exciting time in hydrogeology, and that's one of the reasons.
I agree. I really agree. It's very nice. I had a lot of fun reading the book, and compelling because it's so interesting. So, out of curiosity, would you anticipate another paradigm shift in hydrogeology? Would there be some in the future, or just a curiosity of mine?
I'll let Xiao-wei respond to that. He's the younger person here.
Yes.
I think John can answer this question.
So it's interesting. In a way, the paradigm shift got going there in the 60s in Canada, but it's still underway. Hydrogeological science has been dominated by aquifers. The term aquitard as a widespread term used didn't get going until long after that. And I see in general, aquitards in many cases control the system from the point of view of the hydraulic head distribution and the water chemistry. So the paradigm triggered by this whole flow system thing getting corrected by Toth and Myboom, etc. That shift is still in progress, and we hold some very big biases. The word confining bed, for example, takes the whole focus of groundwater flow systems and puts it on the aquifer. And there's some countries that have many large, great aquifers, and there are countries like Canada. We don't have any large aquifers. Aquitards are what we have. And Meiben went ahead and basically studied groundwater flow systems and aquitards, although he didn't advertise it as that. So yeah, this big paradigm shift is still in progress with many shifts inside it. Like when a paradigm gets mature, it's got all sorts of conceptual models inside it. And I think the importance of this book that Xiao-wei triggered was to draw attention to how our ideas originate, and they originate through circumstance, through fortuitous events, and then that all sets into a paradigm, and then the paradigm locks people into their thinking, and paradigms are useful in science, and then they need to shift, and so this shift is a very slow one, and it's becoming encompassing of all sorts of other things like water chemistry. And Xiao-wei's doing some very interesting work in China on isotopes and water chemistry within the groundwater flow system paradigm. And that's because he's a hydrogeologist and thinks in terms of flow systems. And this work is not the type of work that's done by people we call, say, hydrogeochemists, who have more of a focus on the intricacies of the chemical reactions and whatnot.
Xiao-wei, you want to add something?
Yeah, maybe I think another paradigm should be truly combined research of physical and chemical hydrogeology. Although there was already a textbook called Physical and Chemical Hydrogeology, in my personal opinion, many hydrogeologists focus on either physical hydrogeology or chemical hydrogeology. Knowledge are not truly combined.
Well, that's interesting that you say that, Xiao-wei. I certainly agree. And the Groundwater Project now has several books that are on the chemical aspects of groundwater in progress. And I'm hoping that as part of these books combined, what you're talking about will become more evident. And that really relates to the fact that groundwater is a system. And the study of groundwater as a system hasn't been the focus. We either study it hydraulically or we study it chemically. But a systems approach to studying groundwater is desirable, and it's desirable, in teaching, where you get rid of your biases that come from the history, and you kind of look at it as a system with all the pieces being fitted together. So I think, going back to this book, it's a story of where ideas came from, but most importantly, it's a story of where biases came from, and biases are a hindrance to science.
Well, I'm not sure if if it would be a paradigm shift, but my feeling is that we will be heading to a time where we will have to force recharge into aquifers. As aquifers are a main part of ecology, providing water for many plants and things, and some aquifers are being depleted. So it's coming a time where we will have to force water, not just artificial recharge by gravity with extra power for that. That's what I believe.
So Everton, on that front then, so flowing wells were everywhere back in the old days, and that's what people saw. And now many young hydrogeologists won't have seen a flowing well, and that should be telling us then we've basically dried out the continents so extreme that we don't see any of this groundwater discharge stuff, and that's because we dried them out. And then, as you say, we've lowered water tables and desaturated aquifers so much that we need to start putting water in. So that's an interesting comment you've made.
Yeah, I believe so. Good. All right. Thank you both for this very nice book. Congratulations, Xiao-wei, again, and John for participating as a co-author for that. It's a great book. Please make your final statements. And again, congratulations for your book.
Well, Everton, I thank you for your enthusiasm about seeing the interest and importance of this topic. And I hope the readership, the hydrogeological readership, then will look at this book and pick up on what you're enthusiastic about.
I hope so too. Xiao-wei, please.
Okay, the number of flowing wells is dropping. So many young hydrogeologists do not have the chance to see flowing wells. Actually, many concepts or theories initially inspired by flowing wells can be extended to non-flowing wells. I believe that the history of hydrogeology inspired by flowing wells should be known to more hydrogeologists. So I hope people will enjoy our book. Thank you.
Well, one more comment, Everton. So I think this shows how a very curious person, when you dig deep, can make something out of nothing. This information was all there. Xiao-wei dug into it, developed a very interesting story that's scientifically important from nothing. So we all need to realize, that there's so much buried in science if we are curious and ask the right questions.
That's very true, very true. So thank you both Xiao-wei Jiang and John Cherry for this nice book, History and Hydraulics of Flowing Wells. I do recommend you to read the book. Even if you're not interested in flowing wells, you're going to learn a lot and you have fun because that's going to bring you into the real hydrogeology and how it was developed and how circumstances and good thinking put this good information together. Thank you, Xiao-wei. Again, congratulations both for this nice book. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Everton.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.